Iron Duke was one of the, if not the most successful of all broad gauge passenger locomotive designs. Some 29 of them were built over a period of 8 years. The class began life in 1846 as Daniel Gooches' biggest design yet, Great Western. This was essentially an upscaled version of Firefly, but fitted with even larger 8 feet diameter driving wheels. Built at Swindon Works, under the superintendence of Archibald Sturrock, Great Western weighed a whopping 28 imperial tons. Gooch took the maximum advantage of the broad gauge to use the biggest boiler possible, which had a heating surface of 1,900 square feet. The cylinders were 18 by 24 inches, and under trial in June 1846 with the Exeter Mail train, Great Western hit a maximum speed of 59.5 miles per hour. The design of Great Western, however, was flawed. The problem was, as Robert Stephenson had discovered, with the standard gauge version of the 222 patentee type, was excessive loading on the leading axle. Great Western suffered a catastrophic axle failure, which led to Gooch to introduce a fourth axle, creating a 2222, the 2 leading pairs of wheels being fixed in the frame and not carried as a bogie. They were, however, fitted with a common inverted spring, reminiscent of an equalizing beam of American practice. The overall success of Great Western, however, encouraged Daniel Gooch to think even bigger. The result was the Iron Duke class of 1847. Iron Duke was positively massive for its day. The 8 feet diameter driving wheels were retained from Great Western. Boiler pressure was increased to 100 psi and later 115 psi. The boiler was a whopping 4 feet 9 3/4 inches outside diameter and 11 feet long. Total heating surface was 1,944.9 square feet. The inside cylinders were the same as Great Western, measuring 18 by 24 inches, and Gooch stationary link valve gear was used. Weight in working order was 35.5 imperial tons. Tractive effort was 8,000 force-pounds, 5 times that of Robert Stephenson's patentee from 1833. Iron Duke was, in the words of Dr. Michael Bailey, the ultimate form of that type. In other words, the final and ultimate expression of Robert Stephenson's patentee. Under trials in 1847 and 1848, the Iron Duke class were found to be fast and powerful. Iron Duke itself achieved a speed of 53.4 miles per hour with a gross load of 105 tons. The newspaper, the London Evening Standard, described the Iron Duke as extraordinary, and I quote, "The Iron Duke took one of the express trains from London to Swindon, a distance of 77 miles in 71 minutes, and from Swindon to London in 70 minutes, stopping at Didcot both times. The maximum velocity is said to have been nearly 80 miles an hour, maintaining this for 8 miles together at a rate of 75 miles an hour, and averaging a rate of 66 miles an hour. An unrivaled performance." End quote. The highest speed recorded for the class was 78.2 miles per hour or 126 kilometers per hour, albeit downhill. In 1870, 3 members of the class were rebuilt with new boilers and frames, becoming the progenitors of the later Rover class. Between 1871 and 1888, new locomotives were built to this modified specification, taking the names of Iron Duke class locomotives, which had been withdrawn. Other than the 3 rebuilds, the Iron Duke class was withdrawn between 1871 and 1884. Iron Duke itself being withdrawn in 1871. The last to be withdrawn was Lord of the Isles, built in 1851, and which was retained in Swindon Works. It had been displayed at the Great Exhibition in London, and, after being preserved, was exhibited in Edinburgh in 1880, in Chicago in 1893, and at London's Earl's Court in 1897. It was tragically scrapped in 1906. In order to mark the 150th anniversary of the Great Western Railway in 1988, during 1985, the Science Museum commissioned a working replica of Iron Duke, together with 2 replica third-class coaches. It took as its basis the boiler, inside frames, cylinders, valves, valve gear and crank axle of an Austerity 060 saddle tank locomotive. In this case, Robert Stephenson and Hawthorne, works number 7135 of 1944. As a result of this, several compromises had to be made. The Austerity boiler is slightly shorter and has a smaller diameter than Iron Duke, so its centre line was raised so that the barrel top was at the correct height from rail level. A new smoke box and chimney were made. Outside sandwich frames were flame cut from steel plates and sandwiched with plywood. The crank axle was cut and widened to accommodate the wider gauge, and the driving wheels are of welded construction. It was publicly steamed in Hyde Park, London, in summer 1985 on a specially laid section of broad gauge track, and was named by His Grace the Duke of Wellington. I remember seeing Iron Duke in steam at the National Railway Museum in York in 1988 and was blown away by the massive size of it, especially compared with the replica of Rocket, and I've had a soft spot for the loco ever since. It is now on static display at the Didcot Railway Centre. I hope you have enjoyed this video on Iron Duke, and if you have, please share and subscribe and click the notification bell. If you would like to find out more, check out my book Locomotives of the Victorian Railway by Amberley Books, and I'll post the link in the description below. If you would like to gain early access to Rail Story content, you can do so by supporting the channel on Patreon and Ko-fi. And I'd like to shout out to Joshua Anderson, Gianluberto Lauri and Matthew Richeza as Station Master tier patrons. And I look forwards to seeing you all next time on Rail Story.